how important is to have a business plan for this specific E2 visa? Based on my E2 visa status, could I do some freelance work for other companies? Could I work on the side? What are the main reasons you've seen applications fail?
Are you a tech entrepreneur dreaming of launching or expanding your business in the United States? If so, you've likely come across the E2 visa and wonder how it could help you make that dream a reality. Or maybe you're hearing about it for the first time. This video is all about navigating the E2 visa process tailored specifically for tech entrepreneurs just like you. We will dive into the essential requirements, the investment criteria, and what type of businesses qualify. Plus, we'll explore how to prepare a compelling application, manage the legal and financial aspects, and share tips for setting your venture up for success in the United States. And of course, I won't be discussing this topic alone. Joining me is Chung. He's a well-respected immigration attorney who specializes in the E2 investor visa. Bobby has an extensive experience helping tech entrepreneurs secure E2 visas and establish thriving businesses in the US. He will share invaluable insights, real-life examples, and advice to guide you through the process. So, let's get started.
All right, and hello, Bobby. It's a pleasure having you with us. E2 and tech is hand on hand, a wonderful subject today. So let's jump right in. And the first question is a common question that I ask, but can we start with a brief overview about E2 visa?
Yes, definitely. Happy to explain that. So the E2 investor visa is an entrepreneurship visa, and it's intended to allow foreign citizen investors to move to the United States with immediate families such as spouse and minor children under 21, based on investing in a United States business. And that could be through starting a new enterprise or acquiring a qualifying existing business.
And when we talk about the E2 and we're mixing it with tech, right? Like, why is it relevant for tech professionals nowadays?
It is very relevant for tech professionals, and E2 is a very popular visa for tech professionals for the primary reason that E2 visa allows for small businesses to qualify. A lot of tech professionals are not ready to invest a huge amount of capital or establish a huge business enterprise. They're looking to expand their existing software development or IT consultancy from their home country to the United States. And typically they want to start out small, maybe with a small staff, and oftentimes don't require a huge amount of investment capital. And E2 visa could accommodate that.
And when we talk about the way, so for the people listening to this, what are the eligibility requirements to use the E2 visa as your pathway?
Great question. So the basic requirements of E2 visa are the following: that the applicant has to be a treaty national. There are currently about 83 countries in the world right now that are qualified for E2 treaty nationality. And the applicant has to create a genuine business enterprise in the United States through making a substantial investment to capitalize that business. And it needs to be a business that does make meaningful contributions to the U.S. economy, such as through job creation and the generation of substantial income. And beyond that, the applicant needs to show that he or she has the credible ability to successfully manage and operate the business. So they have to show their work experience, their entrepreneurship experience, any business training or experience, etc.
And if someone right now heard, is listening to the podcast and say like, that's me, I'm ready for the E2. What are the main steps that they need to take in order to start this process?
Another great question. So the E2 investor visa process has essentially two major steps. The first step is that the applicant actually has to establish and invest in the U.S. business first before he or she is allowed to apply for an E2 investor visa. So establishing a business will begin with creating a business entity, bank account, capitalizing that business, spend a substantial portion of that investment capital to develop that business into a real business, an active operating business, and then be eligible to apply for an E2 investor visa. Now, there's two ways to apply for an E2 investor visa. For most people, they'll be applying with a U.S. embassy in their home country. Now, there are some folks that are already living in the United States on some other type of visa, such as a temporary H-1B work visa or on a student visa. For those folks, they may be eligible to apply for a change of visa status directly inside the United States. But the great majority will be with the U.S. embassy.
And and this is something, it comes up very often when we talk about substantial investment, right? Because it's not really a clear number. So, what does it qualify as a substantial investment? And is it the same for all of the different sectors, or tech is a bit different?
Yeah, this is a very popular question. And the reason is the law is completely ambiguous on how much investment is required to
As
qualify for
usual.
E2 visa. As usual, yeah, right. And it's just simply the law simply states you have to make a substantial investment. And the US government's perspective is that they can't specify a dollar amount that's going to be appropriate for every business model. The US government just wants to be assured that the investment capital is appropriate for the type of business to ensure its success in the United States. So for this is important for the tech industry because a lot of the tech businesses are low cost. The entrepreneur already has a business in their home country, in the tech business. They're simply expanding it to the United States. So to expand to establish the U.S. office, oftentimes it doesn't require a lot of investment spending to get the business up and running because they already have all the tech, the software, the infrastructure needed. So this is a big issue because a lot of tech professionals have find it challenging to demonstrate sufficient investment spending uh, to to satisfy it or to build a strong E2 visa case. So that's going to require a lot of creativity, and I've dealt with that scenario oftentimes. And there's definitely a way to satisfy the substantial investment requirement for this scenario. It does require some creativity.
Now, I know you said it's sort of it's never clear. It's just very ambiguous. But is there a minimum amount or the certain number that sort of scratch the right itch?
Yeah, good question. So there's literally no minimum investment amount. It's up to the applicant to present the investment amount and the spending into the startup expenses and try to satisfy the adjudicating visa officer that this amount is sufficient to ensure a successful business enterprise, one in which that will generate substantial income and create those multiple meaningful jobs for U.S. workers. However, in reality, if it's a startup enterprise in the United States, the lower the investment amount presented to the immigration officer, the greater the skepticism, oftentimes, the adjudicating officer will have on adequacy of that investment to build a sufficient business enterprise. What they don't want is a business that is too small, one that is so small that it may not generate any jobs or make any kind of meaningful contribution to the US economy. So, although it's possible to theoretically qualify for a very low investment amount in a low five figures, the applicant needs to be aware that's going to create a risk, and especially the U.S. Embassy worldwide are not all equal. Even though E2 requirement is the same for all nationalities, there are certain embassies that what we call high scrutiny
All
embassies,
right.
meaning that they're going to be more skeptical, they're going to be tougher. So typically, I'll recommend, even if the business requires a very low capital, that they commit at least 100,000. That's not a legal requirement. It is a presentation showing the officer that this is not going to be a tiny, tiny little business and that enough investment capital will be sunk and contributed into the US economy for this business enterprise. So, um, the investor should try to raise and contribute as much capital as possible, even if the business doesn't require all that. Typically, I'll recommend that, okay, even though you don't require to spend a lot to get this business up and running, but you want a strong case, right? You want a high probability of approval.
Exactly.
So sometimes I might recommend prepay some expenses. Look at what your expenditures might be in the next 12 months, real business expenditure. And the more advanced payments you can make, the more you will strengthen your investment amount in your E2 visa case. Um, in addition, some people, the business actually can begin operating before they get the E2 visa. The only restriction is that foreign citizen cannot be living and working in the USA before they get the visa. But if they have a US partner, US employees, and they can manage the business remotely from home country, this business can operate. And when you're operating, the business is incurring operating expenses,
Exactly.
payroll, right? taxes, rent, marketing expenses, all that can accumulate towards building strong investment spending to support a good E2 visa case. So that's another example of a strategy to compensate for the low startup cost.
And it's a good example of creativity too. It's like, I mean, like it's just a way to like, well, I mean, if I don't have that money to put at once, I can start adding all the stuff I'm going to spend throughout the year. So it makes total sense. Now, I do work with a lot of startups, and one of the main things for startups is like they're usually trying to raise investments, right? They're trying to get some money from investors, VCs, or whatever. But can you do something with that? Can you use this sort of raising capital part of the E2 application?
Great question. Great question. It's a very important topic because E2 investor visa is it's an investor visa, and the U.S. government expects the foreign citizen to contribute substantial personal capital into the U.S. enterprise. That's one of the main points of the E2 visa, is for this foreign treaty national to make a substantial financial contribution to the U.S. economy. So whether the E2 entrepreneur could raise capital from other investors to contribute towards the enterprise, it depends on the total capitalization into the business. The smaller the capitalization, meaning the smaller investment amount into the enterprise, the greater the percentage the foreign citizen E2 investor must contribute his or her personal money. And it's the U.S. government kind of uses an inverse sliding scale to determine the adequacy of the foreign citizen's contribution and whether any contribution for outside investor is permissible. So, for example, if the total investment into the venture is on a smaller end of the scale, in the low six figure, like 100,000 or around that range, pretty much the U.S. government wants the E2 investor to contribute 100% or close to 100% of the capital contribution to satisfy the E2 substantial investment requirement. But on the other end of the spectrum, if the total capitalization is bigger, let's say over $500,000 or $1 million, in that scenario, the E2 applicant can reduce his or her percentage contribution to as low as 50%, maybe even a little lower. And the remainder could come from contribution from outside investor. The key here is they want the E2 investor to be the primary and substantial financial contributor. And the lower the capitalization, the greater percentage they expect from the E2 applicant. And the higher the capitalization, the more they will allow outside investors to contribute.
Now, one of the reasons why startups really move to the US, or even small ones, is to raise capital there, right? So does having an E2 visa gives you a little advantage or a little step forward in order to find investors in the US?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the key things that investor will want to know is the personal information of the entrepreneur, the founder. And it's very important for the founder, the entrepreneur, to be able to say, I live and work in the United States, and I personally manage and direct the operations of the enterprise. If the entrepreneur founder can't even live here, can't even work in the US to manage and operate the business, that's going to raise a lot of doubts for the investors' point of view. So it's very important that they have E2 visa already, so they have the stability to share with the investors.
Have you seen cases where that actually made a big difference in your experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not just investors, but like business partners and collaborations and business deals, even customers. Some enterprise customers, they will not enter into business agreement with the E2 business unless they are sure that the founder, the owner, has the legal right to live and work.
Now, one of the reasons, and I've seen this in the US itself, one of the reasons people start creating tech companies is for tax reasons or different reasons. They open their company in the States. Now, can they do that before the E2 applications? Like, can they create the company in the US before actually going through the process?
Absolutely, they can. And actually, they're required to qualify for E2 visa. E2 visa requires the applicant to invest their money first and establish the U.S. enterprise first before they're allowed to apply for E2 investor visa. And given that the company that they're creating is a U.S. business, U.S. company, that business can actually begin operating with the help of U.S. business partner or U.S. employees before the owner even gets an E2 investor visa. The only restriction is he or she can't live here and work in the business prior to getting E2 visa. So the business can begin operating. I've had clients where they established the business initially not to get the E2 visa. They did it for tax reasons or to break into the US market where the US customers don't really want to hire a foreign software company or tech company. So they established a US presence to be more competitive domestically for the US customer base. And then they apply for the E2 visa 2-3 years later after they established the business when they realize, okay, you know what, I need to be in the USA. Let me apply for E2 visa now. That's not as ideal because then the business originally wasn't established and capitalized with the intention of satisfying E2 visa and requires a little bit of backtracking. But that illustrates that you absolutely can establish business and begin its operation. You just have to be careful that when the foreign citizen owner, entrepreneur comes to the United States, he or she limits the activities to permissible visitors activities and not engage in any unauthorized work when they're physically in the U.S. But when the foreign owner, entrepreneur is outside the United States, they can fully manage and direct the operation of U.S. enterprise remotely, virtually from abroad.
And let me do a little storytelling here. Imagine you did this. You invested a lot of your money, 150K. I hired 2 people there. I managed to get the E2 visa. So I started my business in the US with, let's say, 3-4 people. But I realized that I'm not getting enough money yet. I'm hardly paying the rent and the salaries for my team, and I'm not making enough money as the business owner. Now, could I do, based on my E2 visa status, could I do some freelance work for other companies? Could I work on the side, or do I need to only do the business that I'm creating there?
Really good question. Very important question. So the E2 investor visa, it's an entrepreneurship visa, and it only authorizes the owner to work in the E2 business only. Not to go out and get another job, and not even to go out and start other businesses. The visa itself actually prints out the name of the company that qualify for the E2 visa. And that's all the E2 visa is authorizing the foreign citizen entrepreneur to do, is to manage and operate and work in his or her own business, the one for which he or she qualified for the E2 visa. So doing freelance work, working as an employee or independent contractor of other companies here in the United States is not authorized. However, E2 visa does not prohibit B2B relationships. So if you're starting a tech company, a software development, or a tech consultancy, if you can engage in a B2B relationship with the other U.S. company, where it is your E2 company that's entering into a service agreement with a U.S. Customer company, and that you are providing services
Through the company,
the customer through your own company on behalf of your
see.
company, then that would be okay. Now, one caveat with that is, Marco, is that E2 company is really intended for people to be like entrepreneur, director, managers, executives of their business, not grunt workers, service providers. What the law allows is in the early stages of the business, it is okay for the E2 entrepreneurs to have involvement in provision of services to customers, doing the actual service work, tech work. But eventually, once you get beyond the startup phase, they want the E2 entrepreneur to fully engage in managerial executive duties and delegate those service functions to the team members, employees. But it is allowed in the early stage where they're trying to establish the foundation of the business.
And now, when you go through the process, do you need to show proof that you are getting U.S. customers? Is it important? Is it relevant?
This is very important, especially for a small startup tech company in the United States. For a small startup, the biggest concern of GDK visa officer is the speculative nature of the business, because If they have little to no customers and little to no revenues, there's could be a lot of doubts and skepticism about the potential. So, especially for high scrutiny U.S. embassies, they oftentimes will expect validation, proof that the company can actually have the ability to acquire meaningful amount of customers, critical mass of revenue generation to believe in the business plan projections. So oftentimes I will recommend that you generate some meaningful customer contracts first before you apply for E2 visa, to especially to satisfy a strict visa officer that is very doubtful. So the customers, they don't have to be located in the United States. The E2 company, US company, can actually service customer worldwide. And the contribution, even if the customers is outside the United States, the contribution to the U.S. economy is that revenue generated is going to be counted to U.S. taxation and providing work for their U.S. team members. So a lot of times I'll recommend that, yes, your U.S. company is a brand new startup. And since you can't work in the U.S. yet, it may be actually challenging for you to acquire U.S. customers because you can't be here doing sales and stuff.
Exactly.
And doing remote sales is quite difficult sometimes. So I'll typically recommend, look, if it's possible for your U.S. company to sign up international customers, at least for now, to support the E2 application, do it. It will significantly boost the credibility of your startup business for the E2 visa purposes. And of course, once you get the E2 visa, you'll really develop the US market and acquire more US customers. I think most visa officers understand the reality that if you can't work in the USA, it makes sense that your ability to acquire foreign customers are more realistic. They just want to be sure that US company, before they grant up to 5-year visa to allow you to live and work in the United States, that is actually has a realistic chance of success.
There's some growth happening for sure.
That's right.
Now, let me switch a little bit the subject into the hardships of this, like the challenges and trends.
Yes.
So, in your experience, because you've done this for many companies, many tech companies around the world, and what are the main reasons you've seen applications fail? Like, what's the main reason they say no, you're not coming in?
Yes. Some of the top reasons for visa denial for a tech company are insufficient investment spending or investment amount. And that goes to what we were talking about earlier, that a lot of these startups, they don't have a lot of startup expenditures. And they figure that, okay, well, then let me just give it a shot and apply without a lot of investment or a sufficient investment expenditures. Even though it's technically not, there's no minimum expenditure requirement, these visa officer expects the entrepreneur to make a meaningful, substantial investment spending into the U.S. economy. When you haven't done that and you have early stage startup business, there's a real risk of denial for that reason, inadequate investment or investment spending. Second top reason is denial due to marginality, due to being a marginal enterprise. And what that basically means is the visa officer feels the business is just too small to make any kind of meaningful contribution to the U.S. economy. And there hasn't been enough business development progress to create the confidence that the business will grow to a sufficient size within the next several years to grow out of that marginal enterprise concern. So that's why I typically recommend, especially for smaller startups, that the business develop a little bit to show the ability to acquire customers, to show the ability to generate meaningful revenue and the ability, the actual employing of U.S. workers before applying for E2 visa, to reduce the risk of visa denial due to being a marginal enterprise. And the third common reason is the applicant's credible ability, relevant business qualification to successfully manage and grow this business. So typically I'll recommend applicants to create a business that's somewhat related to their professional experience, their track record, their education, because this is especially important for a startup where a lot of the business success factor will depend on the entrepreneur's personal ability to develop and grow the business into success. So the visa officer will look closely at the applicant's track record in the home country. Have you done this kind of business in your home country? And if you have, this is a balancing act. If you have, you've been running a tech company, software development company in your home country, that's fantastic. It shows that you have the experience, right? However, got to be careful about that. If your home country business is operating at a very small scale, one person operation, a very small team, not very profitable, then that could backfire, because if you're really pushing that, I've been doing this for 20 years, a visa officer could look at that and be like, great, show me your tax returns, your payroll record, how big and the size and scale of your foreign tech company, and I'm going to compare that to the potential of the U.S. company. So got to be careful and balance that. Like, if you do have a company abroad, you show that you have experience. But if it's going to be, if the home company, the foreign company is relatively small, don't push it too far. Distinguish it that, okay, my foreign business was small because I did it intentionally to keep it small, but my intention for the U.S. enterprise is totally different. I'm going to do it differently.
Do you think also when you try to come to the U.S. with a very common business idea, for example, you want to bring in, I'm just saying this because maybe I'm wrong, but you're bringing a web development company. You want to create web pages for people. Yeah. That could be something that gets in the way as well.
Creating web, certainly.
So when you create something that is widely available.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So the type of tech company, the type of services you provide does make a difference. They'll, especially for startup where you don't have the proven financial success yet, and they'll look at like, what is the market you're going into? How competitive is your business? If the industry is saturated with this service, then how are you going to distinguish yourself? What is your competitive advantage to be successful in the United States? That all factors into the evaluation and the determination of the probability of success of the business. So if the business is going into a very competitive space and the service is a little bit generic, that could be a problem. The business plan, for example, really has to emphasize the unique selling proposition of the business. How is it going to distinguish itself? Do they have a unique product, service, technology? Do they have other advantages into like servicing certain expertise in particular industries? Really need to showcase that in the business plan.
I'm glad to hear that that's important, because otherwise it's just everybody will move with something that is just working fine and they just try to do the same thing. But if you don't have that competitive advantage, that's going to hit you back, like you mentioned. Now, what happened when the companies don't grow as expected? You had the great plan, you had the team. Let's say you got the 5 years E2 visa, but at the second year you see this is not going to happen. They're not going to make it through. Like, what happened in those cases?
Yeah, this is a great question. The business plan projections are just projections. They're not a guarantee of performance. And you and I both know that in business, there are no guarantees. And the visa officers know that. It's a projection, and that you're going to do everything, the entrepreneur is going to do everything he or she can within his or power to achieve those targets, those financial goals. But a lot of times there are outside factors beyond the entrepreneur's control that influence the business actual performance progress. Now, at the time of visa renewal, the visa officer will examine the business performance during the period of E2 visa, whether it be 2 years or 5 years, such as tax returns, financial records, payroll records, bank statements, etc. If the business did not achieve the numbers that it projected in the business plan, the E2 applicant will have an opportunity to explain why. What kind of unforeseen circumstances that happen that reduce the financial performance? Case in example, during COVID.
Exactly. I was going to mention that.
Control. Yeah. And so in my experience, because I've been doing this over 20 years, I've been through several world crises, the 2008 global financial crisis, the COVID crisis, even the 2000 dot-com bubble burst crisis, where the financial performance, and unlucky for the people that were applying for renewal during the crisis, the number just plummeted. Well, we explained the circumstance in the E2 renewal application, and a great majority of the time, the visa officer was understanding that, yeah, I get it. This is a global crisis way beyond your control. You can't blame you for that. As long as they believe that once the crisis subsides and the foundation of business is still rock solid and has a credible ability to recover strongly, then they'll typically still approve the E2 visa renewal. Now, this goes back to the initial business plan. And typically, I will review the business plan, provide my professional feedback, and I'll look at the projections. Sometimes people, and this is common for entrepreneurs, they want to make it real big, and they see the sky's the limit for their business, and they'll project $100 million, really aggressive projections. I'll tell them, please bring it down. Please bring it down to more realistic numbers, because it's much better to overachieve your projections than underperform. Let's say you do $5 million in revenue, but you have projected $100 million revenue. That's going to look terrible to the visa officer. But if you project $2 million and you do $5 million, you're going to look like a rock star. Bring it down to realistic, and you reduce the pressure on yourself. You also increase the odds that you'll look good to the adjudicating officer when you're renewing a visa down the road.
You see, that's exactly why we tell people, before you do this, talk to an immigration professional like Bobby. There's a reason why we say that. Now, tech has different, obviously, many fields, right? You can apply tech for agro-tech, martech, ad-tech, whatever. In these different fields, have you seen some sort of a preference on, like, these fields are working way better than these other fields, or there's certain tech fields that they're not getting much luck, or like, how is it in your experience?
Yes. So tech fields that are more advantageous for the E2 visa are the ones, for example, that has some sort of societal benefit beyond just making a profit, such as like green energy, environmental friendly technology, green tech. I've done those and gotten those approved. Even though those were early stage startup, I think the societal benefit of promoting the environment really resonated with the visa officer. Also tech businesses that has like more significant capital asset spending, like hardware acquisition, buying hardware, computer hardwares, significant software development costs, like a true startup where they're developing their own platform, their own app, their own software, and they have the software development cost that's done stateside. That could be very beneficial for E2 visa, because that's a significant amount of investment spending. The types of tech businesses that could be more challenging are the ones that have very little startup expenditure, and the product and services are predominantly based on low-cost foreign labor service, so that their primary competitive advantage is that they can do it cheaper because they're hiring, software engineers from overseas. And the reality is that is the case many times, and we have to be mindful. The visa officer is going to be concerned about that. That is your only advantage, but they don't want you to be primarily just hiring foreign labor. It's a catch-22 scenario. So we really have to strategize on the business model. How do we make this business competitive and viable and credible to the visa officer, while still being able to use some foreign labor to be competitive in your space? That requires individual analysis. But those are the tougher cases, but definitely still approvable, because I've gotten them approved. It just requires some thinking and strategizing with the profession.
Creativity. I love how you put it that way. Like you require creativity to do certain things. Bobby, we get into the end of our conversation, and I want to ask you, and I always joke about it, it's the most cliche question I can ever ask you guys, but your to-go tip for the people that is ready for an E2 visa, what will be the best tip you can give them right now?
Very, very important question. And I've seen these mistakes over my 25 years experience so far, that unnecessarily weakens the visa case and diminishes the chances of visa approval. Do everything right the first time. Get the professional legal advice to do step-by-step everything optimally, correctly, and properly the first time, so that you don't need to backtrack, have to damage control. I come across sometimes applicants, and it's not their fault. They don't know the legal requirements or E2 visa nuances and complexities. They'll go ahead and set up the business, invest their money, and I'll discover the fund source is not qualifying. It's coming from some third party. They never took possession control, and the money's already spent. So it's a situation where I cannot reverse what was already done, and we have to start all over again. All the effort, time, money, and energy possibly wasted. So please get the right advice. Do it right the first time.
That is great advice for sure. You don't want to lose that amount of money in this process. Bobby, thank you so much for coming and joining us and help us understand better for the tech people. I know like there are hundreds and if not thousands of tech founders trying to figure out a way to enter the U.S. market, and this advice is priceless. And obviously, if you're watching this and you need more information, feel free to contact us at Joorney. Feel free to contact Bobby to figure out how to start the process right on the first time. And if you want more information like this, please make sure you subscribe and like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring the little bell on the side, and come back for more information about immigration to the US and Canada. Bobby, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I hope to have you. Marcos. Yep, and I hope to have you next time again. There's plenty of stuff we can talk about.
Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, everybody at home.